Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Mobile Health Program webinar series for summer 22. And it sure does feel like summer out. We're glad you can join us today. Hopefully you're beating the heat. And I'm Noelle Duckworth. I am here with the Partnership for Healthy Communities. And we are part of the broader University of Delaware Community Engagement Initiative. And we're so delighted to be one of several partners involved in the mobile health program. The Partnership for Healthy Communities is directed by Rita Landgraf. Our Associate Director is Dr. Erin Knight. I am the coordinator. We have administrative support from our Paulette Hussey-Caston, and our Mobile Health Coordinator, as many of you know, is Christine Sawinski, who joins us today as well. And our Healthy Communities Delaware initiative that we're proud to be managerial partner with is managed by Kate DuPont Phillips. So just to go over a few things around and let us know who is joining us today. We have a wonderful, again, great participation. We're so glad that people are able to join us and are interested in the topics that are being offered. We have overwhelmingly over 50% of you represent community members or our community partner agencies. So welcome. We're glad to have this resource available to all of you and the families and communities that you serve. We have about a third of our audience are UD students, so great to maintaining your health and learning more about nutrition and diabetes. And then about 13% are UD faculty and staff, and then there's some folks that identify as both students and staff carrying that load, about 2% of our viewing audience. So welcome to all. So some technical details again. The audience lines are muted in the Zoom webinar function that we use, and it will remain muted throughout the presentation. But one way that you can certainly engage is through the typical chat box where we can chat and say hello, answer any questions that the presenters might pose throughout the webinar, or share links or resources. However, if you do have a specific question that you'd like us to pose to the panelists today and our faculty and students joining us, please make sure to write that in the Q&A box. So if you hover on the bottom of your screen or wherever your Zoom functions are, you can see a little Q&A folder, and in there you can type in questions, and those questions will be sorting through and posing towards the end of the webinar. So you can enter them at any time. And people can also upvote them. If someone else poses a question and you want to make sure that it gets asked, please make sure to like it and upvote it so it moves up to the top. And we'll do our best to get through all those questions as time allows. So that's how that works. And then the other thing is, I think everyone needs to know, even though you all are muted, today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing after today's presentation. We'll be putting the links to all of the Partnership for Healthy Communities playlist on UD's YouTube on our website, and we'll be getting them out at the end of the webinar series. So you can watch all the webinars that you might have missed. You'll also get a email following the webinar asking you to provide some evaluation information and feedback to us. Either if this is your first time joining, there's some questions, and if you're a repeat customer and you've come back for some more, there is a shorter set of questions. So please fill that out either way. Again, the chat box will show your name when you type in it. And another reminder is any questions that go in the Q&A can remain anonymous. All right, without further ado, I turn it over to our wonderful mobile health coordinator, Christine Sawinski, who's done a great job of organizing all of our speakers and getting the word out to our community and campus partners about this effort.
Thank you, Noelle, and thank you to everyone for joining us today for our fourth webinar in our Summer 2020 series. I'm Christine Sawinski, Project Coordinator for the Mobile Health Program, and I'm very pleased to be part of a collaboration to bring mobile health services to Delaware communities while building workforce development for University of Delaware graduate and undergraduate students. It is my great pleasure today to introduce you to Dr. Bethany Hall-Long, the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Delaware. Bethany, thank you.
Great, well, thank you. It is awesome to be here with my colleagues in my hat as a professor of nursing at UD and on the board with our awesome partnership that we have established. not only with communities, but the work that we've been doing with Real Land Grant, myself and others through St. Francis, as well as, of course, our awesome outreach into the community supported by Highmark. I am on that board of governance, and today I am delighted that I have the opportunity to introduce what I consider future rockstar interns from the University of Delaware new Department of Behavioral Health and Nutrition. But before that, let me just take a little 2 minutes of a commercial to really thank those of you who've been participating in the community. Last week, some of you maybe heard Dr. Sandra Gibney, who is a partner of mine on not only the governance committee, but out in the community, who is leading our initiatives with the Mobile Health Band. We are delighted that with students, we have been able to go to areas in our community, which is statewide, although we started a little bit more focused in Newcastle County. We're screening and education and outreach. It is part again of this partnership through Highmark Foundation, St. Clair's Band from St. Francis, and the University of Delaware in our partnership. And in my office, the Lieutenant Governor's office, part of our challenge, looking at healthy lifestyles. And that's why today I was delighted to do the introduction for nutrition and particularly some focus on diabetes. Really important. We can control during these times of COVID how we are experiencing not only our physical health, but our emotional well-being. And I am just so thrilled today that we have this opportunity. One more minute of a commercial to talk about how our students have made a difference and continue to make a difference across disciplines, whether it's our students in our English department who are writing, whether it's nutrition students, nursing students, frontline behavioral health or education. We are going to churches, to schools, to workplaces, to community settings. We hope if you're listening in and you have an idea that you perhaps get up with Christine later, or if you're part of our Healthy Community Initiative, that you also touch base with Noel. Really important to us that we have your feedback and your engagement. We've been able to transition in this time to do outreach and screening for COVID. We focused a lot on our really vulnerable communities with those who are homeless. Perhaps you heard last week if you participated when Dr. Sandra Gibney talked about some of those screening efforts, not only for physical health, but emotional issues and addiction and substance use. So we're doing it kind of all, but today we're really focused on the Mobile Health Program webinar series talking about nutrition, and particularly one of our largest problems in our state is chronic disease around diabetes. So again, thank you to the webinar for this virtual series. Thank you for allowing me and my office and Lieutenant Governor to participate today. And I have the privilege now of turning this over to our awesome interns. I have to give a shout out first to faculty. I know myself, we are faculty. We are absolutely delighted that we have the opportunity to have students who go into the community and touch individuals and make a difference. And today, we're going to leave here with some really good tips, not only for ourselves, but for our family and our community. And today, we are joined by Anna Liefeld, who is an incredible faculty associate instructor here in our dietetic program and oversees our interns in the Department of Behavioral Health and Nutrition. And again, I just thank her and her leadership and the whole department. And you'll see on the screen now some of our work out in that community where these interns take their knowledge with us. So let's all strap ourselves in and get excited. I know I am to hear from two incredible interns. First, we're going to hear from Ashley Lackey today. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley Lackey, and thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to give this intro.
Thank you, Bethany, and we will turn this over, like you said, to Ashley, and Anya. Thank you again for being with us today. We appreciate that.
All right, so thank you everyone. Thank you for tuning into this webinar today. Me, Ashley, and are really excited to present this information with you today. So throughout this webinar today, we're going to be discussing how to manage your diabetes. We're going to be talking about diabetes screening. We're going to talk about different types of diabetes. We're going to talk about how to read the food label today. We're going to discuss carb counting. We're going to discuss community resources for you to find diabetes management and education in the community. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we have a quick poll that we want you guys to complete for us. We just want to see what you know so far about diabetes management. So take a moment to complete the poll for us. All right, thank you so much for completing the poll. As we continue with the webinar today, you'll find answers to this poll throughout our presentation. Next slide, please. Before we can talk about diabetes, it's most important to talk about diabetes screening. And you may be wondering, when should I be screened for diabetes, or how do I know that it may be time for me to be screened for diabetes? And the first thing is to look at, we want to look at your weight. So if you're classified as overweight, so that's going to be a BMI of 25 or more. Your BMI is your body mass index, and that's going to be based on how much you weigh compared to how tall you are. If you're considered 25 or more with overweight or obesity, and you also are physically inactive, if you have diabetes in your immediate family, if you may be expecting a baby that may be weighing 9 pounds or more, or if you have high blood pressure, this may be a great time for you to be screened for diabetes. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to be talking about 4 different types of diabetes. We're going to be talking about pre-diabetes. We're going to talk about diabetes type 1, type 2, as well as gestational diabetes. So if you're finding yourself diagnosed with diabetes, or you want to know more information about pre-diabetes, what happens is pre-diabetes is just a median between being regular and then acquiring type 2 diabetes. So you're in the median here. The most important thing about diabetes is that it can be managed with physical activity and the way that you eat just alone. But if you are diagnosed with prediabetes, that means that you may have taken a test of a glucose test. So you can take a blood glucose test either under a fasted state, so that means that you haven't had anything to eat or drink for at least 8 hours. And if you were to take that test and your blood glucose levels were to fall between 100 or anywhere between 100 and 125 milligrams per deciliter, that may indicate that you may have prediabetes. Or after you have ingested a meal and you took a test, and 2 hours after that meal, your blood glucose was 140, in between 140 and 199, then that would indicate prediabetes. And then if you were to have your blood glucose tested and your blood tested and your hemoglobin A1C ranged from 5.7 to 6.4, then that means that you will be indicated to have prediabetes. Next slide, please. The next thing we're going to talk about is type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Next slide. And type 1 diabetes, we consider this as an autoimmune disease. So that means that your body is not recognizing some of the cells that secrete insulin. Insulin helps regulate your blood glucose. Anytime when your insulin is unregulated, you may notice that you may have symptoms of increased thirst, frequent urination, or fatigue. Type 1 diabetes usually is found in adolescents or teenagers, but sometimes in adults as well. What happens is when your insulin is unable to be regulated properly, you usually will have to administer your own insulin yourself to prevent high blood glucose in your body. Next slide, please. In type 2 diabetes that happens over time, we consider this as a chronic condition. It means that your body is unresponsive to the insulin after you have ingested a meal. So usually what happens is you eat a meal and after 2 hours or 3 hours, your blood glucose levels are still high, which means that it may have to be maintained through diet and exercise and insulin as well. Next slide, please. The next thing we'll talk about is gestational diabetes. This happens during pregnancy. To be screened for gestational diabetes, this can happen anywhere between the 24th and the 28th week during pregnancy. But if you happen to fall within the high risk, then that can be screened during your first trimester. So gestational diabetes happens when your blood glucose levels are high during pregnancy. The excess glucose that you have, it passes through your placenta and onto the baby. Then the baby's pancreas is activated and that releases the insulin. So as insulin is released, the baby continues to grow larger and larger and larger, which means that when it's time for birth, that the baby may be a little bit larger than what we would recommend. The best way to manage gestational diabetes, along with all the other diabetes, is to keep your blood glucose levels within normal limits and to have regular meals throughout the day. Please keep in mind that about 7% of pregnancies end up with mothers having gestational diabetes. And if you were to have gestational diabetes, you have about a 40 to 60% chance of developing type 2 diabetes in the future. Next slide, please. Now, I know that you heard me talk about blood glucose levels, and you may have questions about what numbers should I pay attention to when I'm at the doctor's, or what numbers are most important for me. So normally your blood glucose level should be less than 100 milligrams per deciliter if you haven't eaten anything for the past 8 hours. Now, if you're eating something after 2 hours, your blood glucose level should be less than 140 milligrams per deciliter. But if you're living with diabetes now and you're on the other side of the spectrum, the numbers that you're going to be focusing on are going to be a little bit different. So that means that your fasted glucose level should be between 70 and 130 milligrams per deciliter. And then after you ate a meal, that should be less than 180 milligrams per deciliter. Also, we want to keep your A1C levels with less than 7%. And then we're going to talk about what A1C is on the next slide. So your A1C level is a test that can be done. It measures the amount of sugar that's attached to your blood cells from the past 3 months. So it gives us a little bit more of a picture of what's been going on in your body for the past few months. If you look at the right of the screen, you'll see that we have a graph of A1C test results. So if your A1C is below 5.7, then that's just a normal level. If it's between 5.7 and 6.4, that's the indication for prediabetes. Now, if it's 6.5 or higher, then that means that will be diagnosis for diabetes. Next slide, please. Earlier this year, the Center for Disease Control released the Diabetes Statistics Report. So in this report, they followed 18-year-olds adults from 2013 to 2016 who acquired diabetes-related complications. So diabetes-related complications are complications such as kidney damage or eye damage. And of those people, 89% of those people were overweight or they had a BMI of 25 or above. almost 40% were inactive, which means that they were engaging in less than 10 minutes of physical activity per day. And then almost 70% had high blood pressure. And high blood pressure is defined as 140/90 or higher. Next slide, please.
Okay, so the next topic that we want to talk about is managing diabetes. So with management, it's very important to try to improve your nutrition as much as possible and make sure that you're including adequate physical activity throughout your day. Checking blood sugar levels regularly is also very important. As Ashley previously mentioned, she mentioned the ranges that you should be aiming to be within. Taking insulin appropriately and consistently as recommended as your doctor will also help to keep those blood sugar levels steady. And managing your diabetes can decrease the risk of developing a lot of health problems that are related to uncontrolled diabetes. And we just have a couple of those listed, and they include heart attacks, strokes, nerve damage, and kidney damage. Next slide. So this is our image of MyPlate. As you can see on the visual to the left, MyPlate consists of about half of your plates, trying to make half of the plate fruits and vegetables. About a quarter of your plate should be grains, and then a quarter of your plate should be a protein source. And then the dairy on the side, just trying to include, as we listed on our first bullet point, low fat or fat-free milk and dairy products throughout your day. And below that, we've listed just a couple of sources of lean proteins, which is, again, making up a quarter of your plate. For chicken, lean sources of chicken include things like skinless chicken breasts or chicken tenders. For pork, that could be pork tenderloins or pork chops. For fish, that includes flounder, cod, tuna, and salmon. And for lean beef, trying to aim for 90% or higher. Next slide. So, in terms of saturated fat and trans fat intake, MyPlate is really pushing to decrease the intake just for cardiovascular health and overall health. And foods that tend to be higher in these saturated fats include things like bacon, cheese, sausage, cookies, and baked goods. So trying to either limit or reduce your intake of these foods can be very beneficial to your health. Next slide. So in terms of our grain portion, which again is making up about a quarter of our plate, MyPlate is aiming to make about half of your grain intake whole grain intake. A good way to do this is to look for the word whole at the beginning of the ingredients list. So looking for ingredients like whole wheat, oats, barley, quinoa, and examples are whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta, brown rice as opposed to white rice, and then oatmeal and popcorn. Next slide. And another topic that we wanted to include was the importance of fiber. So at the bottom, you can see that fiber is very beneficial. It will help you to feel full for longer. It can help lower cholesterol, and it can also decrease your total number of carbs in your meal. So increasing fiber intake is very important. It's important to try to aim for about 25 to 30 grams per day. And we can get fiber in lots of different sources, including fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and legumes. And we wanted to include that it's important to note that a good source of fiber, if you look at the nutrition facts label, will have about 2.5 grams of fiber per serving. And if it's an excellent serving, or if it's an excellent source, it will have 5 or more grams of fiber per serving. Next slide. So carbohydrates, they're also known as carbs, and the 3 main types are starches, sugars, and fibers. And all 3 of these are the body's main choice for energy. So our little equation is the amount of carbs plus the amount of insulin either released by your body or administered if needed will determine your blood glucose levels. Next slide. And our first category of those types of carbs were starches. So foods that tend to be higher in starch include starchy vegetables such as peas, corn, and potatoes. dried beans such as kidney beans, lima beans, and lentils, and then grains. And examples of grains includes oats, barley, whole wheat, and rice. Next slide. So some tips on carbohydrates. It's important to try to limit your refined carbs, so things like white bread, white rice, and white flour, as well as added sugars. And added sugars tend to be found in things like cookies, cakes, donuts, or soft drinks, and even candy. And instead choosing carbohydrates that are whole grains or fruits, legumes, vegetables, and milk. These are just going to be a little bit better for your blood sugar levels. Next slide. So the importance of carbohydrate counting. As we said before, counting your carbohydrates will or could help you manage your blood sugar levels. So especially if you're taking insulin, counting your carbohydrates will help you to determine how much insulin you need to administer. And the right combination of insulin, carb counting, and exercise will help you to keep those blood sugar levels stable throughout your day. On the contrary, not managing your blood sugar levels will lead to consistently high blood glucose levels, and this can lead to glucose being released into the urine. Next slide. So we also wanted to brush on the other two macronutrients, which are protein and fat, and they do play a smaller but very important role in blood sugar levels. So if you're eating carbohydrates, it's important to try to pair them with either a fat or a protein, as this will help to slow the rise of blood glucose levels and keep it steady throughout the day. So we just listed a couple of snack ideas. One would be crackers with hummus or crackers with peanut butter, or you could even pair an apple with 1 to 2 tablespoons of either nut butter or peanut butter or some butter, whichever you prefer. Next slide. So with diabetes, we would like to aim for 45 to 60 grams per meal for women and 60 to 75 grams for men. And for snacks, 15 to 20 grams tends to be ideal. So you might be wondering, what does that mean? So below, we have noted that 1 serving of carbohydrates equals 15 grams. So each of these food items listed below is 1 serving. So 1 slice of bread, a 1/3 cup of cooked pasta or rice, or a 1/2 cup of mashed potatoes, all equal 1 carbohydrate serving and can fit into your either 3 to 4 carbohydrate choices per meal for a woman, or 4 to 5 carbohydrate choices per meal for a male. Next slide. And so some of you might have seen this before. It's called the Exchange List for Diabetes. It's a really useful tool for carbohydrate counting. And it lists the serving size and calories, as well as carbohydrate content, protein content, and fat per serving. And the link below is just a great way if you would like to access it online, and you can use it within your carbohydrate counting for your analysis. Next slide, please. And it's very important not to forget to include beverages while you're counting these carbohydrates. So certain beverages such as milk, fruit juice, or soft drinks do contain carbohydrates, and it's important to include them while you're making these counts. And there are also a lot of beverages that might have added sugars, including sodas, iced teas, sports drinks, or energy drinks, and it's important to include those added sugars as well.
One good way to understand what you're eating or how to count your carbs or figure out how many carbs are in your beverages is to read your nutrition facts label. So your label is just going to look like this here. I just cut this cardboard out of a piece of box, but it's going to be on the back of a container or the back of something that you may be drinking. So the first thing with reading the label is to look right at the top. You're going to look at the serving size. It's going to discuss the weight or the quantity of food that is being referenced on the food label. And then the next step is going to look at the number of servings. So that's going to be placed right underneath your serving size. That's going to be the total number of servings in a package or in your container. And then the last step, which is maybe the most important is the number of carbs, the total carbs per serving. So that's going to be the number of grams in one serving of food item that you're going to be eating. Next slide, please. So we have here an example of a nutrition food label for you. So if you look here, it looks like, just like I said, the serving size is going to be located at the top of your food label. So here we see that it says the serving size is 3 pieces. And then in parentheses, we see that it says 90 grams. So 90 grams just means that that's how much that food weighs when it's placed on a food scale. If we look further, we see that it says servings per container, and it says 3. So that means that there are going to be 3 servings in the whole package. As you continue to look on your nutrition facts label, you'll see that calories are listed, total fat is listed, cholesterol, sodium is listed as well. And then we get to total carbohydrates. So for this package, 30 grams equals 1 serving, which is the 3 pieces of your product. Right underneath your carbohydrates, we see dietary fiber. So dietary fiber is important because it does not digest, so we cannot digest it. So dietary fiber is actually a part of the total carbohydrates. So what you can do when you're counting your carbohydrates is that you can subtract your number of fiber, the grams, from your total carbohydrate number. Next slide. Another way to manage your diabetes is with food as well as with physical activity. So exercise can be anything that you can set your mind to be. It doesn't have to be a gym membership. It doesn't have to be anything extensive, but if you're looking to start exercising or if you want to change your exercise regimen, it's important for you to talk to your doctor so you guys can discuss what exercise sizes fit your lifestyle and fit your personality the best so that you can continue to do this for a long period of time. Exercise can be anything between walking, biking, gardening, golfing, playing outside with your children or your grandchildren. It can be doing yard work in your house. It can be a lot of different things. If you like yoga, Pilates, you can do things like that as well. The goal for exercise is to have at least 150 minutes per week. So over 5 days, that's just 30 minutes. And then over 7 days, it's only 20 minutes. Well, all we want you to do is just even start with just 10 minutes a day. 10 minutes a day is just enough. You can start with that and gradually increase over time as you become more comfortable with being physically active. The most important part about exercise is making sure that you have a snack with you just in case your blood sugar gets low. And then make sure that you're staying hydrated because it is very hot now and we want to make sure that you're staying hydrated as well. Also, be mindful of your feet. Make sure that you're wearing supportive footwear, and then check your feet as well once you're finished exercising. You want to check for any kind of blisters, any kind of pain, or anything like that, so that if it persists, you can bring it up to your doctor. Next slide, please. Some helpful tips that we want you guys to take with you today is to think ahead of time about your carbs. So you want to plan your meals earlier if you can, and which can be a little bit easier to count your carbs. It's hard to count carbs when you're hungry. So this is a great way to kind of prepare your meals in advance. Most importantly, if you feel as though some of the information that we talked about was a little bit too much, maybe exchange list sounded a bit complicated, maybe you want to know how to become more active, maybe you want to learn a little bit more about the food label, this is a great time to connect with a registered dietitian. Now, a registered dietitian is going to be a licensed nutrition professional. They have a bachelor's degree and they have sat for the registration exam, which means that they have taken numerous classes in biology, chemistry, anatomy, and they understand how food interacts with the human body. They can help you create a meal plan. They can help you modify your lifestyle. They can help you understand how to manage your diseases, even if it's diabetes, even if it's just physical activity, even if it's just learning simple things or things that you may feel maybe a little bit more complicated. Next slide, please.
So as Ashley said, meeting with a registered dietitian is a great way to learn all about nutrition in general and also about carbohydrate counting. So we wanted to mention that the University of Delaware Nutrition Clinic does offer nutrition counseling, and their dietitians are specializing in diabetes, sports nutrition, and eating disorders. And we've listed their phone number here that you could go ahead and schedule an appointment with them if you wish. On the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they do also have a resource where you can go ahead and find a registered dietitian if you're not in the state of Delaware or if you're not near the University of Delaware campus, that you could find a registered dietitian closer to you. And it's also very important to review your insurance booklet to see what nutrition counseling is included with your insurance and your benefit information. Next slide. So finding diabetes-friendly recipes. If you go onto Google, if you look for recipes that are labeled as diabetes-friendly, that can be a great way to find recipes. But we want to just mention that going on to the American Diabetes Association, they have a recipe. It's called the Diabetes Food Hub. It just has a bunch of diabetic recipes on there. Really great resource, as well as the CDC website. They have a bunch of really great resources on there as well, and a lot of recipes that would be very appropriate. As we had mentioned before, you can consider referring to an exchange list to guide you on the nutrition content of the foods that you are eating. And meeting again with the registered dietitian can be a great way to learn how to use those exchange lists and understand them. And cookbooks can also be a great resource as well. Next slide. So for pre-diabetes, we wanted to include some community resources that are available to you. So through the YMCA of Delaware, there is a diabetes prevention program currently being offered online. The link is there. You can go ahead and access it and see what programs they have available. There are also prevention programs available on the CDC website. If you're not located again in Delaware, you can find a program near you. Next slide. And resources for diabetes, there are a lot of resources. Some online resources, again, are diabetes.org. The CDC website has their specific diabetes resources as well. And the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases has great information too. So specifically in Delaware, if you go onto the healthydelaware.org website, they have a section for diabetes self-management programs, and you can go ahead on there and find to see if there's a program that's starting that's available near you. And Christiana Care also offers various classes as well. And if you're, again, located in a different state, diabetes.org has a Find a Program resource available that you can go ahead and type in your state or your zip code and find a program near you. Next slide. So this is the same poll from the beginning, but we just want to do it again as an evaluation to see everything that you have learned from this webinar. So if you don't mind going ahead and answering its 3 questions again. Perfect. And as we can see, there's definitely been an improvement in the answers, and I hope that you guys have learned a lot from our webinar. We can go to the next slide.
So if you all would like to please submit your questions right now to the Q&A box, we can go ahead and ask our presenters, Ashley and Ashley, some questions that you may all have. And thank you very much for this presentation, and we'll give everyone the opportunity to present their questions here. Okay, I have some questions are starting to come in. First question is, can type 2 be reversed?
There is a possibility that type 2 diabetes can be reversed with weight loss and diet management. If there is a possibility, yes.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Next question we have is, I find carbohydrate counting to be very difficult. What are some tips you have for this?
So as we mentioned in our webinar, trying to meet with a registered dietitian or a certified diabetes educator could be very beneficial to you if you are having trouble figuring out how to keep track of your carbohydrates. They can help you to understand it, and as well as they might help you to learn and understand the exchange list that we talked about. And we also think that maybe it would be helpful to either plan meals ahead or keep kind of like in mind some meals and snacks that you already know ahead of time the carbohydrate counts for, so that you have them and you don't have to go ahead and do the carbohydrate counting for every meal and snack if you have kind of a base to go off of.
And I'm just going to chime in here to add on to that. Definitely meeting with a dietitian, especially initially, to get a goal in mind for how many carbohydrate choices to consume at each meal, how many snacks to have, how many, really how to distribute them throughout the day is really important. And then if you have an idea of what types of foods you'd like to have included in your meal plan, your dietitian can help you make sure that those get included. So I know Ashley and Ashley have heard me say this before, but if someone were to tell me you can never eat chocolate again, I think my quality of life would significantly decrease. So that would be something that I would bring up to my dietitian, because really there is a way for someone with diabetes to eat any food that they want. It's a lot of times just a matter of portion size and how often you have it. So if I had diabetes, it wouldn't be advised for me to eat chocolate after each meal, but I could certainly include it in small amounts, most days of the week. So a good dietitian will really incorporate the types of foods that you enjoy eating, because we still want food to be pleasurable. We want to not take away all the foods that you enjoy eating. So if you're having a hard time figuring out how to make the foods that you enjoy eating fit, meeting with a registered dietitian can be really helpful. Ashley and Ashley included some really great resources if you want to start by looking some things up from those websites. There's a lot of misinformation on the internet. So I always caution people about where they're finding this information. Just because it's on Instagram or just because you found it by Googling something doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. If it sounds like a really miraculous cure, it's probably too good to be true. We wouldn't have any diabetes if curing it would be as simple as having a shot of apple cider vinegar every day. So the resources that Ashley and Ashley mentioned will provide you with some evidence-based practice, but then a registered dietitian can really help you personalize your meal plan. So that was a really long answer. I see some other questions popping in, so I'll stop talking for a minute.
Oh, thank you, Anya. Thank you for that very much. One of the questions we had was related to the poll. And the question was, what was the correct answer to the first question on the pre and post test?
You said it was to the first question?
Yeah, so the question was, what was the correct answer to the first question on the pre and post test? So what's the correct answer question? question number 1.
Yeah, so the question was how many carbohydrates are recommended for snacks? And the answer was B, which is 15 to 20 grams.
Okay, next question. We do have some questions rolling in, so thank you everyone for your participation. I use Splenda instead of sugar in my coffee. Will sweeteners raise my glucose levels?
If I'm not mistaken, I believe that the Splenda doesn't. It doesn't. I think that's considered a free choice on the exchange list.
It is, and as you'll probably see, I love my long answers, but historically we've thought of artificial sweeteners as not raising blood glucose levels. There is, just to throw a wrench in the works and not make it as easy, there is some research mostly on animal models, not on humans, but there seems to be some possible crossover that some individuals actually will experience rises in blood sugar after eating some artificial sweeteners. And we think it might be due to the bacteria in their intestines, that depending on what bacteria you have in your intestines, which vary from person to person, they may actually be able to ferment those, use those artificial sweeteners and actually increase blood sugar levels. So in mice, there were some studies that showed that the ones that were consuming some artificial sweeteners actually experienced higher levels of glucose than mice that were given just straight up sugar. So we think for most people, artificial sweeteners won't raise their blood sugar levels. That's actually the big draw of these artificial sweeteners. But there are some individuals that may respond differently. And there's, at this point, we don't have the science to predict who it is. But checking your blood sugar levels, if you've been diagnosed with diabetes or prediabetes, can be really helpful to see how you as an individual respond. So technically, if you have just black sugar with Splenda in it, it really shouldn't do much to increase your blood sugar level. But if you're seeing spikes in your blood glucose level after consuming the sugar with a Splenda, then you might know that that's something that you're going to be more sensitive to than others. So checking blood sugar levels regularly, I know it's for most people not really something they enjoy doing, but it's really important, especially as you're starting to learn more about how different foods affect you.
Great, thank you. Next question is eating sweet potatoes better than regular potatoes if you have prediabetes?
Sorry for the delays. I think sometimes we have a hard time figuring out which one of us is going to jump on answering that question. They actually contain carbohydrates just like white potatoes do. There are different nutritional benefits of both of those types of potatoes though. So white potatoes are a really good source of vitamin C and iron, which a lot of people don't know. So at their next cocktail party, that'll be a fun fact you can share. Whereas the sweet potatoes tend to be a good source of beta carotene. They have a little bit less in the way of carbohydrates. They are still a good source of fiber, but both types of those really you want to be not cautious of, but you want to just include them in your carbohydrate counting.
Great. Next question is, so the question that this person has stopped eating sweets except for natural sugars. They drink only water and went from 225 to 189 with them having type 2. Are they on the right track?
When you say 225, are you talking about pounds or their glucose level?
That is a great question. I don't know that answer. So it's their blood sugar.
Okay, and they said they're pre-diabetes. They have pre-diabetes now.
No, this is a different person. This person has stopped eating sweets except for natural sugars. They drink only water and went from 225 to 189 with them having type 2. Are they on the right track?
So it sounds like they're doing things that are on the right track. It's hard to say especially depending on how long they've been making these adjustments in their lives. But the most important thing is just making sure that you're regulating and spacing out your carbohydrates throughout the day. And that I know that you took away sugar, but hopefully you're still enjoying some of the foods that you do like, so that you can continue to manage your diabetes the best way possible.
Thanks, Ashley. And so I will correct myself. I apologize. The question was how it came over. It looked like BS is in blood sugar, but it's really LBS. So it was in pounds, not blood sugar. So you kind of get to answer the question two different ways.
Yes, I think in both ways, it would be
Yeah.
definitely
So,
on the right track.
yeah, and any weight loss is great, especially if you're moving down, because we talked about the BMI level. So if you're decreasing your BMI level away from the 25 or higher, if you're getting closer, lesser than that, then that's amazing. So keep up the good work.
And the other thing I wanted to add on just to that answer is we talk a lot about added sugars when we're talking about general health, and including naturally occurring sugars because they tend to have other nutrients associated with them. So to give you an example of natural sugar, if we're eating fruits, for example, they contain sugar. If you're drinking 100% fruit juice, technically that's not considered an added sugar. But when you're carbohydrate counting, it's really important to include those sugars as well in your total carbohydrate count. So clearly by the weight loss that you've experienced, you're on the right track. But although we often talk about avoiding the added sugars and focusing more on the naturally occurring sugars, they still do need to be included. So examples of some naturally occurring sugars would be sugars in fruits, in some vegetables, in dairy products, especially milk and yogurt. Cheese tends to have a little bit less. In legumes, which are things like peas, lentils, black beans, pinto beans, chickpeas. So those are all really important foods from a nutritional standpoint. They contain a lot of nutrients. They contain lots of vitamins, minerals, a lot of times fiber as well. But when you're carbohydrate counting, definitely include those as well.
Great. Next question is could you, this kind of follows up a little bit where you were just talking about, Anya, could you comment on the value of vitamin D3, please?
I can't say for sure that I have a definitive answer on that. It is a nutrient that has been sort of a hot topic. When I talk to my friends about hot topics in nutrition, vitamin D is usually not what they're thinking of, but it is something that we're doing a lot of research on. So over the last decade or so, we're learning more and more functions that vitamin D has. We used to always think of it in terms of promoting bone health. It helps your body absorb calcium. So if you don't have enough vitamin D in the body, then your body can't absorb the calcium in the diet. And so it affects your bone health, your dental health, and many other things. There's a lot of research happening now to look at what is the impact of vitamin D3 on lots of other diseases, some autoimmune diseases like type 1 diabetes, like lupus, multiple sclerosis. And the evidence is a little bit inconsistent. So for a while, doctors were wildly prescribing vitamin D supplements because when you look at blood levels of the population, we're finding that they're actually trending towards the low end of normal and sometimes even what would be considered deficient. With the increased prevalence of indoor work, so less exposure to sunshine, the increased use of sunblock, people are making less vitamin D as a result of exposure to sunlight, and a lot of foods that we eat here in the US tend to not be great sources of vitamin D. When we look at food sources of vitamin D, it's really fortified dairy products like milk that has vitamin D added to it. Most yogurt, even though we look at it sometimes as sort of an equivalent food, most yogurt doesn't have vitamin D added to it. So unless someone is actually drinking fluid cow's milk, they may not be getting a lot. Fatty fish is another great source. But again, most people aren't having fish for breakfast. They're not having fish many times a week. So from a dietary perspective, we tend to not get a lot of vitamin D naturally. And if we're limiting sun exposure in order to prevent skin cancer or wrinkles or whatever your reason might be, we might not be getting a lot. So there's been some debate over, is that large a percentage of the population actually deficient in vitamin D, or do we need to look at different cutoffs? With supplements, I would be really cautious. Vitamin D is one of the supplements that's more likely to cause toxicity compared to some other vitamin and mineral supplements that are out there. So I would definitely talk to a physician before starting that. That being said, including food sources that include vitamin D is a good idea. Really difficult to develop toxicity if you're eating foods containing vitamin D. We see that much more with supplements. And as I'm sort of going off track here, if you're not someone who drinks cow's milk and you're drinking something like soy milk or almond milk, rice milk, cashew milk, oat milk, any of those other substitutes, really look at that nutrition facts label that Ashley showed you. I know we kind of focused on the carbohydrate content on the nutrition facts label today, but if you were to look further down, it would list vitamins and minerals too, some of them. Vitamin D is one of those nutrients that is typically listed on a nutrition facts labels. That can give you an idea of if that substitute milk is fortified with vitamin D. Some brands of, for example, almond milk or soy milk are fortified, so they're pretty nutritionally equivalent to cow's milk, but not all of them are. So hopefully everybody paid attention when Ashley was doing that nice job going over the nutrition facts label, because that can provide a lot of information.
Thank you, Anya, for that. Could you comment on, this individual was told that diet drinks are better than drinks with raw sugar. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. So this is one of those, depends, I guess, on what you're looking for. A lot of times when people ask me, is this healthier than this? It depends on, well, what's your nutrition goal? Is it to avoid a long list of ingredients? Is your goal to avoid artificial sweeteners, colors? Is your goal to lose weight? Is your goal to lose sodium, limit sodium? If your goal is to reduce sugar intake, then a diet drink is less likely to increase your blood sugar level. So whether it's raw sugar, whether it's high fructose corn syrup, whether it's cane sugar, whether it's honey, all of those are going to increase your blood sugar level. So if you've seen the sodas that are out there that use cane sugar, the sort of retro throwback ones, high fructose corn syrup gets kind of a bad rep. They're not necessarily going to be a better choice for you, if you especially if you're trying to reduce your blood glucose level. It's probably the shortest answer I've given.
Thank you, Anya. Next question is, what is considered a good A1C?
So your A1C levels depends on if you have diabetes or not. So if you have diabetes, then you want your A1C level to be less than 7. But if you are at pre-diabetes, you want that to be, well, if you're at pre-diabetes, you want that to be less than 6.
Thank you. Next question is, how can I explain to my family members about my new diabetic diet? It can be hard to follow a they commented that it can be hard to follow a carb-controlled diet when their family likes to eat pizza and spaghetti for dinner.
Right, so the one thing is to think about the different variations of how you can get your carbohydrates. So for like pasta or pizza, you can try the whole wheat options that we discussed today. And then the most important thing is to think about your portion sizes and how big your portions are. So if you like to keep, well, one thing you can do is have measuring cups in your home, and that can kind of help you measure out your portions that you may need that may be ideal for you. You definitely want to consider the My Plate and go to that website, because it describes how your plate should look when you're preparing your meals at home. And hopefully that if everyone is, hopefully by you being consistent with your portion sizes and what you're putting on your plate, that trickles over to your family as well, so that everyone can be a little bit more mindful with what they're eating on a daily basis.
Okay, great. Next question I have here is, do I need to adjust my meals depending on how active I am?
So I think when Ashley was talking about physical activity, she mentioned that it can be important, especially depending on how hungry you are, that if you're increasing your physical activity, you might need to be increasing your calorie intake, but also it's important, and I think she mentioned this, to try to have a snack before your workout, just to keep those blood sugars steady throughout your workout. And as we mentioned, a good snack could be combining the carbohydrates with either a protein or a fat, and again, the purpose of having that snack before your workout would be to keep your blood sugars stable.
Great, thank you. And one question we have here is, I am pre-diabetic. What resources are available to me to prevent me from becoming a full diabetic?
So there's a lot of resources and that we put on our slides, and we're going to be sending you that information today as well. So you want to make sure that you're looking on those websites. There's a lot of different things on those websites. One is recipes as well, different ways to manage your portion sizes, as well as being connected with a registered dietitian or a certified diabetes educator. They can really help you with reading the food label. They can help you with portion sizes, and they can help you just kind of learn more about how to manage your daily eating habits with physical activity as well.
Great, thank you. Last question that I have here at this moment is, I find carbohydrate counting to be very difficult. What are some tips you have for this?
So I think Ashley did a nice job addressing that earlier, as far as possibly going to see a registered dietitian, and some of those resources that are going to be sent out that Ashley and Ashley have put together are also going to kind of point you to places where you can find solid advice. Ashley also mentioned the use of measuring cups, which is really helpful. A lot of times people have no idea how much they're eating. So if I tell someone half a cup of mashed potatoes, what does half a cup of mashed potatoes even look like? Most people truly don't know. I think people who do a lot of cooking or baking, who are used to using measuring cups, might have a little bit of an idea, but it's not something that you have to do for the rest of your life for every single meal. I find that even if just for a week, you're using a measuring cup just to measure your rice out, measure out your pasta, measure out how much milk you're drinking. You know, one glass is not necessarily one glass. They come in all different sizes. It can give you a pretty good picture. You get a pretty good idea fairly quickly of what portion sizes are. So a lot of times when I'm talking to clients and they say, well, but I don't eat a lot of pasta. Well, when you go to a restaurant, sometimes what you're served, depending on the place, could be actually 6 cups of pasta, which would be 12 carbohydrate exchanges or more. So getting an idea of what a portion size is according to the carbohydrate counting booklets is a really important first step, and it can get rid of a lot of frustration when you feel like you're doing the right thing and nothing is changing. Just take a look at how much you're actually consuming. And as I said, it's not something that, you know, you're gonna have to go to restaurants for the rest of your life with a measuring cup. You will be able to eyeball it pretty quickly.
Great, thank you, Anya and Ashley for answering all the questions that we had today from our audience, as well as for the wonderful presentation that you put together for us. We really appreciate it, as well as I know that our audience is going to be very appreciative of the resources that you have also put together. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking the time to do that for our community. We are appreciative of that. So again, thank you again for presenting, and thank you to our audience for attending our webinar today on nutrition and diabetes. We do are appreciative of all of our community members that are able to take part of this, as well as you all passing along the word to your friends and family so that they can also join us here on our webinar series. Next week, our next webinar will be on domestic violence. That invite will go out tomorrow, as well as the eval for this presentation, as along with the resources, will go out tomorrow as well. If you have any questions on the mobile health program, you can contact me, Christine Sawinski, the project coordinator. If you have any questions about the Partnership for Healthy Communities, please contact Noelle Duckworth. And if you have any questions or comments about the webinar series or would like to get in touch with our presenters today, you could more than happy to reach out to myself again or Noelle, and we can put you in touch with anyone that was here today with us. So again, thank you for your time and thank you for joining us, and we hope that you all will be able to join us next week.